Who could have guessed that an ordinary Tuesday afternoon would change an entire system? Angela Richardson, a 45-year-old black woman, had spent her career fighting for justice as Massachusetts Deputy State Attorney. But today, she would find herself on the other side of that justice, arrested for searching through her own car. This isn't just a story about a wrongful arrest. It's a tale of resilience, a battle against prejudice, and how one woman turned personal injustice into a catalyst for systemic change. Join us as we follow what happened on that fateful day and the remarkable events that followed. Before this emotional story begins, leave a comment letting us know which city you're watching from, and don't forget to like, subscribe for good karma. The Boston summer sun beat down mercilessly on the federal courthouse parking lot as the clock struck 1 in the afternoon. The heat created shimmering waves above the asphalt, but Angela Richardson had more pressing concerns than the weather. Through the open door of her black SUV, she methodically searched every compartment, growing increasingly frustrated with each passing minute. "It has to be here somewhere," she muttered, brushing aside a stack of legal briefs. Her fingers moved swiftly but methodically across the leather seats, checking every possible spot where her wallet might have slipped. At 45, with 15 years as Deputy State Attorney under her belt, Angela had never missed a meeting with a federal judge. Today wasn't going to be the first. Her phone buzzed again, the 5th time in 10 minutes. Probably Sarah, her assistant, wondering why she hadn't arrived for the 2 o'clock meeting with Judge Harrison. The thought made Angela's stomach tighten. She needed her ID to get through courthouse security, and right now that ID was playing an unwelcome game of hide and seek. The parking lot was nearly empty, most of the courthouse staff and attorneys already inside for afternoon sessions. Only the distant hum of traffic and the rustle of papers broke the heavy summer silence. Angela's normally immaculate navy suit showed signs of wrinkles as she leaned further into the vehicle, checking under the seats. A low rumble of an engine approaching barely registered in her consciousness. Police cruisers were common around the courthouse, but the sound of heavy boots on asphalt, followed by a sharp voice, made her freeze mid-search. "Step away from the vehicle, ma'am." The voice carried that particular tone of authority she'd heard countless times in her career, but never directed at her. Angela straightened slowly, her courtroom instincts kicking in as she turned to face the officer. He was a middle-aged white man, probably in his 50s, with steel-grey hair and cold eyes that had already made their judgment. "Officer," she began, keeping her voice calm and professional, "I'm just looking for my wallet. I seem to have misplaced it in my car." Officer James Peterson, as his nameplate identified him, took a step closer, his right hand resting casually on his holster. His eyes moved deliberately from her face to her expensive suit, then to the open car door, his expression hardening with each passing second. "Your car?" The question dripped with skepticism. "Mind showing me some proof of ownership?" "As I just explained," Angela replied patiently, "I'm looking for my wallet, which contains my ID. I'm the Deputy State Attorney, and I'm running late for a meeting with Judge Harrison." A dismissive smirk crossed Peterson's weathered face. "Deputy State Attorney?" He let out a short, harsh laugh. "And I'm the Attorney General. How about you drop the act and tell me what you're really doing here?" Angela felt her heart rate quicken, but years of courtroom experience helped her maintain her composure. "Officer Peterson, I understand you're doing your job, but you're making a serious mistake. If you'll just run my plates or contact the courthouse—" "Hands where I can see them," Peterson interrupted, his smirk replaced by a hard frown. "Now." The irony wasn't lost on Angela. Just yesterday, she'd been in a meeting discussing police reform and community relations. Now here she was, living example of exactly why those reforms were needed. But 15 years of legal experience told her this wasn't the moment to argue that point. Slowly, deliberately, she raised her hands. "Officer, I strongly suggest you think carefully about your next action. You're about to make a significant error in judgment. Peterson's response was to reach for his handcuffs. Turn around and place your hands behind your back. You're under arrest for suspected vehicle theft and failure to comply with an officer's orders. As the cold metal closed around her wrists, Angela held her head high. She'd prosecuted enough cases to know exactly how this would play out, not just today, but in the weeks and months to come. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was about every person who'd ever faced this kind of prejudice without the power to fight back. "Officer Peterson," she said quietly as he led her toward his cruiser, "I want you to remember this moment. Remember my name, Angela Richardson, because I promise you this is going to be a day you'll never forget." The summer sun continued its relentless beatdown on the parking lot. Angela's SUV door remained open, papers scattered across the seat, and somewhere in that mess, a wallet that could have prevented it all. But perhaps, she thought, as Peterson roughly guided her into the back of his cruiser, some lessons needed to be learned the hard way. The cruiser's door slammed shut with a finality that echoed across the empty parking lot. Through the window, Angela watched her open car door grow smaller in the distance, a visual reminder of how quickly an ordinary afternoon could turn into something far more significant. This wasn't the end of her day. It was just the beginning of something much bigger. Inside the police cruiser, Angela sat upright, ignoring the discomfort of the handcuffs. The air conditioning blasted cold air, a stark contrast to the summer heat outside, but she barely noticed. Her mind was already working through the legal implications of what was happening. Through the partition, she could hear Peterson radioing in. "Dispatch, I've got a 1031 in custody. Female, African American, caught breaking into a black SUV at the federal courthouse lot." "Copy that," the dispatcher's voice crackled back. "Bringing her in?" "Affirmative. She's claiming to be some kind of state attorney." Peterson's tone carried a mix of amusement and disdain. Pretty elaborate story for a car thief. Angela closed her eyes briefly, collecting her thoughts. In 15 years of practicing law, she'd seen countless examples of prejudice in the system, but experiencing it firsthand was different. Every detail, every dismissive tone, every assumption was being filed away in her mental catalogue. The drive to the police station took less than 10 minutes. Peterson pulled into the parking lot of Precinct 12, a building Angela had visited numerous times, always through the front door, always with her credentials pinned to her lapel. The irony of entering through the back, in handcuffs, wasn't lost on her. "Let's go," Peterson said, opening the back door. "Maybe now you'll be ready to tell us who you really are." As he led her through the back entrance, several officers looked up from their desks. Angela recognized a few faces, officers who had testified in her cases, who had seen her in court. She caught their eyes deliberately, watching recognition slowly dawn on their faces. "Sergeant Miller," she called out to a familiar face, her voice clear and steady. "I believe you testified in the Robertson case last month. Perhaps you could help Officer Peterson understand who I am." Peterson's grip on her arm tightened. "Be quiet and keep walking." But Sergeant Miller had already stood up, his expression shifting from confusion to concern. "Officer Peterson, hold up a minute. Is that—" "Just processing a car thief, Sarge," Peterson cut him off, steering Angela toward the booking area. "Says she's some big-shot attorney, but no ID, no proof." "Because my ID is in my wallet," Angela repeated calmly, "which is what I was looking for in my car when your officer decided to arrest me without cause." The booking area fell silent. Other officers had stopped their work, watching the scene unfold. Peterson seemed to sense the shift in atmosphere, but he pressed on, pulling out a booking form. "Name?" he demanded, pen poised. "Angela Richardson," she replied clearly. "Deputy State Attorney for the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. And before you continue with this booking, I suggest you run my plates, check my bar number, or simply call Judge Harrison's chambers, where I'm now extremely late for a meeting." For the first time, a flicker of uncertainty crossed Peterson's face. But before he could respond, a commanding voice cut through the tension. "What the hell is going on here?" Captain Thomas Roberts stood in the doorway, his face darkening as he took in the scene. Angela knew him well. They'd worked together on numerous cases over the years. "Dear God," he muttered, moving quickly toward them. "Officer Peterson, remove those handcuffs immediately. Ms. Richardson, I cannot begin to apologize." "Save it, Captain," Angela interrupted smoothly, rubbing her wrists as Peterson reluctantly removed the cuffs. "This isn't about apologies. This is about a systemic problem that needs addressing. And thanks to Officer Peterson here, we're going to address it head-on." The booking area remained eerily quiet, all eyes on the scene unfolding before them. Peterson stood rigid, his earlier confidence evaporating as the reality of his situation began to sink in. Angela straightened her suit jacket, her dignity intact despite the circumstances. "Now, if someone could please send an officer to secure my vehicle and retrieve my wallet, I have a meeting to attend. And afterward," she added, fixing Peterson with a steady gaze, "we're going to have a very interesting conversation about reform in this department." Despite Captain Roberts's intervention, Angela found herself seated in an interrogation room. She had insisted on following proper procedure. If Officer Peterson wanted to play by the book, they would play by his rules, all the way to their inevitable conclusion. The room was like countless others she'd been in before, though usually from the other side of the table. Stark fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting harsh shadows on the grey walls. A large mirror dominated one wall, a one-way window she knew all too well. "Still sticking to your story?" Peterson entered the room, his demeanor tense, but still carrying that edge of superiority. He sat across from her, placing a folder on the metal table between them. "It's not a story, Officer Peterson," Angela replied calmly. "And you know that by now. The question is, why are we still here?" Peterson leaned back, crossing his arms. "Protocol. No ID. Suspicious activity." "Suspicious?" Angela's voice remained steady, but took on a sharper edge. "Tell me, officer, what exactly was suspicious about a professionally dressed woman looking through her car in a courthouse parking lot?" "You were rummaging through—" "I was searching for my wallet," she corrected him. "In my car. Outside my workplace. Would you have found that suspicious if I were white?" The question hung in the air between them. Peterson's jaw tightened, but before he could respond, Angela continued. "I'd like to make my phone call now. Unless you plan to add denial of basic rights to the growing list of violations we'll be discussing later." Peterson pushed back his chair with more force than necessary. "Fine. One call." As he led her to the phone, Angela could feel the eyes of other officers on her. Word had spread quickly. The deputy state attorney, arrested for allegedly trying to steal her own car. She could already imagine the headlines, but this wasn't about embarrassing the department. This was about something far more important. Angela dialed a familiar number, her fingers moving with practiced precision. After 2 rings, a deep voice answered. "David Thompson speaking." "David, it's Angela. I need you at Precinct 12. Now." There was a brief pause. "Angela? What's going on?" "I've been arrested," she said clearly, aware of Peterson hovering nearby. "For attempting to steal my own car. Officer James Peterson seems to have some concerns about my identity." "You've got to be kidding me." David's voice hardened. "I'll be there in 15 minutes. Don't say another word to anyone." Angela hung up the phone and turned to Peterson. "My attorney is on his way. I suggest you use this time wisely, officer. Perhaps run those plate numbers I mentioned. Peterson's face flushed, but Angela wasn't finished. Or you could call Judge Harrison's chambers. I'm sure they're wondering why I missed our 2 o'clock appointment. The judge can verify my identity, assuming you're willing to admit you might have made a mistake. Before Peterson could respond, Captain Roberts appeared in the doorway. Officer Peterson, my office. Now. As Peterson left, Angela settled back into the interrogation room chair. She didn't need to check her watch to know David would arrive exactly when he said he would. David Thompson wasn't just any attorney. He was one of Boston's most respected civil rights lawyers and her closest friend since law school. True to form, exactly 15 minutes later, Angela heard the unmistakable sound of David's authoritative voice echoing down the hallway. I'm here to see Deputy State Attorney Richardson, and somebody better have a damn good explanation for this situation. The door opened, and David strode in. At 6'2", with broad shoulders and an impeccably tailored suit, he filled the small room with his presence. His dark eyes quickly assessed Angela before turning to Captain Roberts, who had followed him in. Would someone like to explain why the Deputy State Attorney is being held in an interrogation room? David's voice was calm, but carried an undertone of controlled anger. There's been a misunderstanding, Captain Roberts began. A misunderstanding? David cut him off. Let me be clear about what I understand. A highly respected state official was arrested without cause, denied her basic rights, and treated like a common criminal, all because one of your officers couldn't believe a black woman might own a luxury vehicle. The captain had the grace to look uncomfortable. Mr. Thompson, we're already addressing— You haven't begun to address this, David interrupted. This isn't just about one officer's prejudice. This is about systemic failure at every level. Where were the checks and balances? Why didn't anyone verify her identity before bringing her in? How many others without Angela's resources and connections have faced similar treatment? Angela watched the exchange silently. She had seen David in action countless times, but this was different. This was personal. I want every record of this incident preserved, David continued. Every report, every video, every communication. This isn't going away with an apology and a handshake. Captain Roberts nodded slowly. Of course. We'll cooperate fully. You'll do more than cooperate, Angela finally spoke, rising from her chair. This department is going to become an example, either of how to address systemic racism and abuse of power, or of what happens when you fail to do so. The choice is yours, Captain. The room fell silent as her words sank in. Through the one-way mirror, Angela could see officers gathering, trying to catch glimpses of what was happening. Good, she thought. Let them watch. Let them learn. Now, she straightened her jacket. I believe Officer Peterson has some paperwork to complete. An official apology would be a good start, followed by his badge and gun. Ms. Richardson, Captain Roberts began carefully, we have procedures. Yes, we do, she agreed, and I'm very familiar with them all. So let's begin with Officer Peterson's written statement, shall we? I'm particularly interested in hearing him explain why he felt it necessary to arrest a woman for looking through her own car without even running the plates. David placed a supportive hand on her shoulder. Angela, are you sure you want to handle this now? We could— Now, she said firmly. This ends today, David. Not just for me, but for everyone who's ever been in this room without someone like you to call. The fight for justice was just beginning, but Angela Richardson was ready. She had spent her career working within the system. Now it was time to change it. The police chief's conference room felt smaller than usual as Police Chief Michael Harrison faced the gathered group. On one side sat Angela Richardson and David Thompson. On the other, Officer Peterson and Captain Roberts. The tension in the room was palpable. Let me get this straight. Chief Harrison began, his voice tight with controlled anger. "Not only did you arrest the deputy state attorney without cause, but you also failed to perform even basic verification procedures." He held up a manila folder, Angela's complete file, hastily pulled from department records. Her photo ID stared back from the top page, along with her impressive credentials and years of service. "Chief, Peterson started, but Harrison cut him off. "I'm not finished, officer." The chief's tone grew sharper. "Ms. Richardson has worked with this department on over 200 cases. Her parking spot is literally marked with her name. And yet you couldn't take 2 minutes to run her plates?" Outside the conference room, a small crowd of officers had gathered, trying to appear busy while stealing glances through the glass walls. News traveled fast in the department, and this was unprecedented. "Furthermore," Harrison continued, pulling out another document, "Judge Harrison's office has confirmed that Ms. Richardson was expected for a meeting. A simple phone call would have verified her identity. Instead, you chose to escalate the situation based on—" He paused, fixing Peterson with a hard stare. "What exactly?" Peterson shifted uncomfortably in his chair. His earlier bravado had evaporated, replaced by a dawning realization of the gravity of his actions. "Sir, the situation appeared suspicious." "Suspicious?" Angela's voice cut through the room like a blade. "Let's be precise, Officer Peterson. What made me, specifically, look suspicious to you?" The silence that followed was deafening. Everyone in the room knew exactly what had made Peterson suspicious. A black woman in an expensive car outside a federal courthouse. David Thompson pulled out his laptop. "Chief Harrison, I have here the statistical breakdown of Officer Peterson's arrest record over the past 5 years. The racial disparity is striking." Peterson's face paled as Thompson turned the screen toward the chief. The numbers told their own story, one of consistent bias and prejudice masked as police work. "This isn't just about today," Angela said, her voice calm but forceful. "This is about a pattern of behavior that's been allowed to continue unchecked. How many others have faced similar treatment without the resources to fight back?" As if on cue, Captain Roberts' phone buzzed. He glanced at it and grimaced. "Chief, the press is outside. Someone leaked the story." Harrison rubbed his temples. "Of course they are." He looked at Angela. "Ms. Richardson, how would you like to handle this?" Angela leaned forward, placing her hands flat on the conference table. "Transparently, Chief. No cover-ups, no excuses. The department needs to acknowledge what happened and take concrete steps to ensure it never happens again." "You're talking about systemic changes," Harrison said, studying her face. "I'm talking about accountability," she corrected, "starting with Officer Peterson's immediate suspension pending a full investigation." Peterson's head snapped up. "You can't—" "Actually, she can," David interrupted, pulling out another document. "Given her position and the circumstances, Ms. Richardson has every right to demand a full review of not just this incident, but your entire service record." Captain Roberts cleared his throat. "Chief, the media presence is growing. Channel 5 is setting up cameras." Harrison stood, decision made. "Officer Peterson, surrender your badge and weapon. You're suspended effective immediately, pending investigation." He turned to Captain Roberts. "Set up a press conference for this evening. We're going to get ahead of this." As Peterson slowly removed his badge, Angela watched him carefully. "This isn't personal, officer," she said quietly. "This is about justice, the very thing you swore to uphold." "Ms. Richardson," Harrison said, "I hope you'll consider being part of the press conference. Your perspective would be valuable." Angela exchanged glances with David before nodding. "On one condition, Chief." "This can't be just about damage control. I want real changes. New training protocols, review procedures, community oversight." "Agreed," Harrison said quickly, perhaps too quickly. And, Angela added, I want access to all complaints filed against officers in the past 5 years. Let's see how many others have faced similar situations. The room fell silent again as the implications sank in. Through the glass walls, the crowd of officers had grown larger. Some looked concerned, others angry. A few nodded in agreement. Peterson stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. This is ridiculous. One mistake and my entire career— One mistake. Angela's voice was steel. Or one time you got caught. How many others, Officer Peterson? How many people have you profiled, harassed, arrested without cause? The only difference today is that you chose the wrong target. David placed a calming hand on her arm, but Angela wasn't finished. Chief Harrison, I suggest you prepare for more than just today's press conference. Once this story breaks, others will come forward. This is just the beginning. As if to emphasize her point, Captain Roberts' phone buzzed again. Chief, more media arriving, and social media is picking up the story. It's trending locally. Harrison nodded grimly. Ms. Richardson, Mr. Thompson, would you join me in my office to discuss the press conference details? Captain, escort Officer Peterson out through the back, and someone get me the department's PR team. As they stood to leave, Angela paused beside Peterson. Remember what I said in the parking lot about remembering this day? I meant it. But this isn't about revenge, officer. It's about change that's long overdue. The truth was out now, laid bare for all to see. As Angela followed Chief Harrison to his office, she could feel the weight of what was coming. This wasn't just about one arrest or one officer anymore. This was about transforming a system that had protected prejudice for far too long. The real work was just beginning. 2 weeks after the incident, Angela sat in a newly established conference room at police headquarters. The walls were covered with statistics, flowcharts, and proposed procedural changes. Around the large oval table sat a diverse group: police officials, community leaders, civil rights activists, and legal experts. The numbers are undeniable, Angela stated, pointing to a projected graph. In the past 5 years, minority citizens were 7 times more likely to be stopped and searched without probable cause. Officer Peterson's case wasn't an anomaly. It was a symptom of a deeper problem. Chief Harrison, who had aged visibly in the past 2 weeks, nodded grimly. Since your incident went public, we've received over 50 new complaints. People who previously felt too intimidated to come forward are finally speaking up. That's exactly why we need comprehensive reform, David Thompson added, spreading out a thick document across the table. The reform initiative we're proposing isn't just about new rules. It's about changing the entire culture of law enforcement. The initiative, largely drafted by Angela and David, proposed sweeping changes: mandatory bias training for all officers, new verification protocols before any arrest, body camera footage review system, community oversight board, anonymous reporting system for both citizens and officers. Some officers won't like these changes, Captain Roberts warned, reviewing the proposals. Some officers didn't like seatbelts or Miranda rights either, Angela countered. Change is never comfortable, but it's necessary. As if to emphasize her point, a young officer named Sarah Chen spoke up from the end of the table. Yesterday I responded to a call about a suspicious person in Brighton. Under the old system, I might have just detained him. Instead, I followed the new verification protocols. Turns out he was a professor at Boston College checking his own mail. The room fell silent, absorbing the implications. This was exactly the kind of situation that could have escalated under the old system. We're also seeing results from the community outreach program, Reverend James Walker, a prominent community leader, added. People are starting to trust the process. They believe their voices will actually be heard. Angela smiled slightly, remembering the community meeting she'd attended last night. The church hall had been packed, with citizens sharing their stories. Some heartbreaking, some infuriating, all important. The media coverage has been surprisingly positive, David noted, pulling up several newspaper headlines on the screen. Boston Globe is calling our initiative a model for national police reform. That's because we're not just putting band-aids on bullet wounds, Angela responded. We're addressing the root causes of systemic bias. The new training program was particularly comprehensive. Angela had insisted on bringing in experts in psychology, sociology, and civil rights law. Officers weren't just being told what not to do, they were learning why their unconscious biases could lead to devastating consequences. The simulator training has been eye-opening, Captain Roberts admitted. Making officers experience situations from the other perspective. It's changing mindsets. The high-tech training simulator, funded by a federal grant, placed officers in scenarios where they experienced racial profiling firsthand. It was uncomfortable, but effective. We've also seen a significant increase in minority recruitment, Chief Harrison added. Applications are up 40% since we announced the reforms. Angela nodded, but her expression remained serious. That's encouraging, but diversity alone isn't enough. We need systemic accountability. She pulled up another document, the new verification checklist that all officers were required to complete before making an arrest. It was thorough without being cumbersome, designed to prevent bias-based decisions while still allowing officers to do their jobs effectively. The body camera review system is already proving its worth, David commented. Last week alone, it flagged 3 potential incidents of bias. Under the old system, those might have gone unnoticed. Or deliberately ignored, Angela added quietly. The meeting continued for several hours, addressing everything from training schedules to community feedback mechanisms. As they wrapped up, Chief Harrison turned to Angela. Ms. Richardson, I know these past weeks haven't been easy, but what you've helped create here, it's revolutionary. Angela gathered her papers, thinking of all the people who had shared their stories since her incident went public. It's not about me, Chief. It's about creating a system that works for everyone, not just those with the power to fight back. As she left the meeting, Angela passed the department's bulletin board. Posted prominently was the new mission statement, to protect and serve, equally, justly, always. Below it hung a photo from last week's community forum, showing officers and citizens working together in small discussion groups. Her phone buzzed, another email from someone wanting to share their story. Since the reforms began, Angela had received hundreds of such messages. Each one reinforced the importance of what they were doing. Ready for tomorrow's training session? David asked, falling into step beside her. Always, Angela replied. The new recruits seem particularly engaged. I think they understand they're part of something historic. Outside, the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the police headquarters steps. Angela paused, remembering that hot summer day when Officer Peterson had arrested her. So much had changed since then. You know, David said, following her gaze, Peterson's case review is scheduled for next week. Angela nodded. I know, and unlike him, we'll ensure he gets a fair hearing. That's what real justice looks like. As they walked to their cars, Angela spotted a young black officer helping an elderly woman with directions. The officer was taking time, showing respect, doing her job the way it should be done. Small changes, but they added up to something bigger. The system wasn't perfect yet, far from it, but it was changing. One policy, one training session, one interaction at a time. And that, Angela thought, was worth every moment of that difficult day in the parking lot. This wasn't just about preventing another Angela Richardson incident. It was about creating a future where such incidents would be unthinkable. 6 months after that fateful summer day, Angela Richardson stood at the podium in the police headquarters main conference room. The room was packed with officers, community leaders, and press, all gathered for a significant announcement. After a comprehensive review, she began, her voice clear and steady, the Police Review Board has made its final decision regarding Officer James Peterson. Effective immediately, his employment with the Boston Police Department is terminated. The announcement wasn't surprising. The evidence had been overwhelming, but it wasn't about one officer anymore. Peterson's case had become a catalyst for change that reached far beyond Boston. But today isn't about one person's dismissal, Angela continued. It's about celebrating the progress we've made together. She gestured to the screen behind her, where statistics told a compelling story. Wrongful arrests down 60%, community trust ratings up 45%, officer satisfaction with new protocols at 80%, minority recruitment at historic highs. Chief Harrison stepped forward to join her at the podium. 6 months ago, I thought Ms. Richardson's arrest was a disaster for this department. Today, I recognize it as the wake-up call we needed. Angela smiled, remembering their first tense meeting. Change doesn't come easily, she acknowledged, but it comes inevitably when good people refuse to accept injustice. The reforms they'd implemented were gaining national attention. Police departments across the country were requesting copies of their training protocols. Angela had been invited to speak at congressional hearings on police reform. A single moment can change everything, she told the gathered crowd. That day in the parking lot, I had a choice. I could have simply accepted what happened as the way things are. Instead, I chose to fight, not just for myself, but for everyone who's ever faced similar injustice without the power to fight back. She paused, looking out at the faces before her. Among them were many of the officers who had gone through the new training program. Their perspectives had shifted, their understanding deepened. Real change doesn't come from the top down, she continued. It comes from each of us choosing to do better, to be better. Every officer who stops to check their assumptions, every citizen who speaks up instead of staying silent, every person who chooses justice over convenience, that's how we build a better system. David Thompson, sitting in the front row, nodded in agreement. Together, they had built something remarkable. The Reform Initiative had become a model for departments nationwide. Last week I received a letter, Angela shared, her voice softening. It was from a young black woman who had been wrongfully detained last year. She wrote that seeing our reforms gave her hope that her children might grow up in a world where they're judged by their character, not their color. The room was silent, absorbing her words. That's why we do this work, Angela concluded. Not for recognition or reward, but because justice delayed is justice denied. And when we stand up for what's right, even in the face of resistance, we create ripples that reach far beyond ourselves. As the applause filled the room, Angela stepped back from the podium, feeling the weight of the moment. Her incident had been painful, but it had sparked a transformation that would benefit countless others. Outside, the Boston winter sun cast long shadows across the city. Angela thought about that summer day that had changed everything. She thought about Officer Peterson, about the system that had enabled his behavior, and about the courage it took to change that system. You did it, David said quietly, joining her at the window. Angela shook her head. We did it. All of us. And we're not finished yet. She was right. There would always be more work to do, more battles to fight, more minds to change. But today, in this moment, they had proven that justice wasn't just an ideal. It was a possibility within reach. As she gathered her things to leave, Angela passed the department's new mission statement, now emblazoned in gold letters. Justice, equality, accountability, every person, every time. It was a promise to the community and a reminder to everyone who wore the badge. More than that, it was living proof that one person's stand for justice could transform an entire system. The sun was setting as Angela left the building, but tomorrow would bring a new day, and with it, new opportunities to build the fair and just world they all deserved. Thank you for taking time to witness this story with us. If this story touched your heart, share your thoughts in the comments. Every story we share is meant to move and transform. If you found inspiration in today's tale, simply leave a 9 below. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories that remind us of our shared humanity. Until our next story unfolds.